Resignation, the great prioritization. What other word is out there? We've been talking about this for a while now when it comes to talent. So there's the talent attraction, and then there's the talent attrition or retention, I should say. Now, it's not just new hires, it's not necessarily always the new generation. And so, what do you do with the mix of all the wonderful different levels of generations that are out there today in what we call work? And also the education system that is the future workers. And so today we're going to talk about bridging the talent gap from crisis to the next gen talent planning. And we're going to explore a bunch of different topics today with Roxana and myself. So come join us now.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. Those of you that are watching us streamed live on LinkedIn from via my profile or Roxana's profile,
Yeah.
welcome, welcome. We also stream live on YouTube, our YouTube channel called the Game Changing Work channel. Those of you that might not be aware, welcome if you're there. Or on our personal Facebook pages, we also do that for our friends and families out there. So, welcome. Now, this is a really interesting topic today.
Yes.
I think before we get started, you and I were talking before we went on air about game changing work in general,
Mm-hmm.
and why this probably is an interesting topic for someone like myself and you to talk about. Well, we know in our careers, I started out in education. That is what I actually went to school for. I was a high school science teacher. And so when it comes to learning and what that starts to look like in careers and talent, I was always very connected to that because in education, I was always thinking about what are the things and the skills that you need when you leave my classroom. And so what I do right now is business agility and this whole agile coaching world. It it's all I've noticed that the science and the people part, I'm doing it again. Like it's come full
Yeah.
circle.
Yeah.
Now for you, our bridging point was the people part, which was quite
Exactly.
interesting.
It's
And you,
interesting because I think at the core we're both teachers in a way, right? I remember when before I got into the workforce, I was thinking of actually becoming a teacher, and then funny thing is, I actually ended up working in learning and development and doing a lot of training programs in international law firms. So that's another way of being a teacher. And what I do now with all of my workshops and with the coaching programs that I run, it's pretty much another level of teaching. But I think where you and I converge and where we bring game changing work is exactly this, because we're here to serve the individuals, the teams, and the organizations and help them make a difference and transform the workplace, and not just for themselves but for generations to come. We're really, really passionate about creating a future of work that we're happy with and proud of. So that's the essence of why game changing work and what it means for the both of us.
and because we have this nature of learning, we're all about helping create these learning cultures. And so when we talk about lifelong learning, we will go into education and we'll go into organizations because in our eyes there's no difference because you have the new talent coming in
Mm-hmm.
right into the workforce or you have the
Yep.
existing. Now let's dive into what we're going to talk about today. And where is our first one that we had was where is the talent, that the current talent crisis and some cause and effects in that.
Yeah.
What say you on that, what you've discovered lately, Roxana?
So before we dive in, I just want to give a shout out to Alex, who was supposed to be here with us, our guest for today, but he
Oh
couldn't
yes,
be.
yes.
And I want to say, yeah, we miss you. So hope you're watching this at some point. Um,
Yes, Alex.
right?
We
Because,
definitely miss you. And great point out. I'm all jumping in, going, but we had a special guest,
yeah,
and unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it today. He had
yeah,
uh, a conflict. Hope you're
yeah.
feeling better.
So,
And but we'll have you on next time. And he focuses on the talent space, and he was on
exactly.
another prior show.
Yeah.
So we're making up,
Mm. We're making up.
but
Yeah.
and we're going
But
now.
there's a lot to unpack right here, because there's many layers to what we call the current talent crisis. And I think it's the whole workplace redesign, to be honest. If we talk about the
Yeah.
big it's the redesign of the whole thing. And it's how you make room for the diverse talent that is out there. I was talking to, for example, some team managers in one of the nonprofit organizations that I work with. And they were saying, well, we don't find people, and it's harder than ever to find good people to join our team. And they were a little bit concerned about what that means for the current team that they have, because they were all feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. They were taking over a lot of other tasks from some of those roles that they couldn't fill. So that's one thing. On another hand, you have people who don't move a lot because they need that sense, they have that sense of security staying in the same job, or they completely probably left the workforce because they wanted to do their own thing. And
Yeah.
they decided, with the pandemic, there's actually a lot of people who decided to do that and who started their own businesses and wanted to be in this entrepreneurial world. um, and also because of the whole redesign, because you either have fully remote or hybrid work, or some organizations that are asking people to get back in the office full time, then how are you going to reach that talent that you actually need, and how much are they willing to flex to the kind of work that you're proposing, to your work model? So that's going to be, and of course that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, there's another element too is I always talk about thriving versus surviving.
Yeah.
And those that were trying to find something for thriving, right? And, you channel the things, oh, the love that the work, but then there's always responsibilities depending on, where you are in your life journey. You might have a family, you might have a mortgage, and what may have you. We know that during this talent surge, it first started with probably the younger generation, and then now they're saying now it's people within our age generation that are saying, do I really want to do this until the day I retire? And so they're rationalizing thriving versus, surviving.
Yeah.
Now, I would guess, and we don't have all the data yet, and this is what makes this conversation very interesting, is you're going to have people that jump in to survive, but
Hmm.
the minute they have something to thrive, they're going to jump back out and they're probably going to leave that job.
Yep.
And there's probably not much that we can do about it. It's just a reality because they're still trying to figure out what's going to make them thrive until they retire, or that they can do that for X amount of years. I
Hmm.
mean, you have a lot of full-time employees, and some of you might look at this when it comes to the benefit package, and you're thinking about your long term. Is you're looking at that benefit package and you're looking at the 401k contribution. Well, they'll match dollar for dollar or 50% on the dollar, and but you have to be vested. And so typically it's about 3 to 5 years that you'll be vested to get that return back. So there's going to a lot of big people that are looking at that and saying, okay, well, I got to stay here for 3 years in order to get that money. Or you have a signing bonus, or they relocated you and you are stuck there for a certain amount of time. So there's a lot of what I would say, a lot of constraints in the
Hmm.
system, and variables that are still happening right now that we're not really sure what everyone can guess, but if people are still having this need to thrive versus survive, they're always going to look for opportunities to move into the thriving sector.
Yeah.
And then there's people that are so far down the end, they're getting ready to retire. And we're going to jump into the generations when it comes to this talent piece, that they're pretty fixed and they're okay. And there's a huge opportunity to benefit from that. And we'll talk about that also coming up. Now, we have a couple of visuals for all of you that are watching or watching the replay. So as we start to dive into this, please use the chat. We love the interaction, your comments, or questions as we start to get into this subject. Now, the work that we do when we're talking about this is relevant to some of the posts that you and I do on an individual basis. And you just had a presentation today with one of the visuals that were about to pop up, which I found quite interesting. And you were talking about this very subject about the different generations.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up right now.
Yeah, pull it up, because it's always fascinating, and I'd love to see, for those of you who are watching, first of all, which generation are you, and what do you resonate with most from what you see here? Because again, when we talk about the crisis of the talent crisis, we have to look in perspective. How do we solve for it? Because we cannot stay in the problem mode, right? And you were talking about people feeling stuck and people wanting to thrive rather than survive. But we have to also be aware of the fact that there's going to be different needs and different perspectives on thriving, depending on the generations.
Highly contextual, right?
Highly contextual, exactly. And there's a study that was made by Gaia Insights that connected the way that we learn, our learning styles, with our working styles, because the way that we're used to learning in school, that becomes very much part of our working style. This is work for us when we're kids, right? And then it becomes our working styles as adults. And if you look at the differences between the generations, it kind of makes sense. If you look at the perception on learning, for baby boomers, it was a privilege. Not everybody could learn. And because of that, not everybody could work or actually have a good place to work at, right? They were mainly doing like the survival job.
You're lucky. It's the good old saying, you're lucky to have a job.
Exactly. So
right?
that's where, there's Manish, Gen Y. Hello, welcome. All right. So see, for Gen Xers, the learning and working that was necessary, and how many of us, like you and I, Veronica, were Gen Xers? Like I heard
we're on the tail end of it.
The tail end.
That's an interesting thing, that people that are on the tail ends.
But I heard this from my parents a lot when they were telling me, well, you need to have good grades so that you graduate and then you get a good job. So it was absolutely, and it was necessary for you to get a good job so that you can pay your bills, so you can get the house and the car and all of
it
the
was
stuff
always,
that
are you contributing to your 401k?
Exactly. Like everything.
Getting lectured from my father, and he was in HR, by the way, going,
see,
you're not stable. Why can't you stay in a job? And for me, I was thinking more like a millennial, where I'm like, if I'm not getting what I need, I'm going to go find it somewhere else.
Exactly.
Right. Because like it's funny how us were in the cusp. We had a lot of millennial tendencies.
Exactly. We do, because, and then with millennials, what happened, learning was just available because they grew up in the internet era. Working was available. They're the ones who brought the work-life balance into the boardroom. There was none of that discussion before they got into the work.
And they're in their 40s right now. So there's a lot of people, leaders in organizations, so that you're starting to see the dynamics within organizations starting to shift and change. And also these new startups, the more younger type of companies, a lot of them are millennials.
Yeah. And you recognize these.
Yeah. You'll notice them on LinkedIn, folks, right? The ones that are posting and talking.
And you notice the discussions between millennials and Gen Zs, who come, and for them learning is everywhere. They don't have to learn just in school. They learn from YouTube, they learn from TikTok, from like
Yep.
wherever. But it's interesting for me. It was interesting if we look at the differences when it comes to feedback and the perception on the leader
That's key.
between the generations. Because for if you look at for boomers, it was the exam, so you either got it right or got it wrong, and that was bad.
Yep.
And then for Gen Xers, feedback equaled criticism. And this is what we see in the workplace so much right now, because there's a lot of Gen Xers who are leaders right now in organizations. And this is why people cringe when they hear the word feedback, because it means criticism. And guess what? This is why millennials cringe, because for them, feedback means mainly positive reinforcement. They thrive on positive reinforcement. Don't criticize me all the time. Give me something good that actually creates a good framework that we can work with.
And that goes with what Marcus Buckingham talks about, that, his 9 lies about work, which I refer a lot about, is that everyone craves attention, good or bad. They just want attention. But we know in studies that if you get good intention, the benefits of it, it's not necessarily feedback, it's attention. You'll see that even in animal behavior. They're good at, a good example is if you are ignored, right? It's not good. That's why when you're training dogs, and again, there is a similarity, but I'm just giving this example, is that the reward, you can either with kids, right, the positive, or you're going to punish them, right? So it's attention is attention, because people do not like to be ignored. So that millennial generation is really about the positive intention, and know the value of it, right? Not the negative, which criticism, absolutely, you would probably put that in the other bucket.
But also, you know what? This also connects to what we've seen when it comes to skills development. You know how the organizations were very focused on helping you improve on what you didn't have enough of, right?
Oh, that drove me crazy.
So you're not a good presenter, you're not a good public speaker, or you're not too good at this, you're not too good at that. Let's work on that.
But I felt like my mother was talking to me.
But you wouldn't get the praise for the stuff that you were good at, and you wouldn't get the growth anymore for the stuff that you were already good at, which is a problem. Because if you think at why all of those learning and development programs didn't give that return on investment, it's exactly because of that. Because we didn't help people grow on what they naturally could grow.
They're not maximizing on what actually someone might enjoy doing, which we don't know yet, and we'll talk about that soon. But they're good at doing it. And so if somebody's good at doing something, then it becomes a conversation. Well, do you like doing that? Because why don't we enhance that? And then every skills that are around it that are supporting that is what we help elevate, right? So if you're really good at sales, but maybe your communication needs some work, but hey, we can make you be a really great with your sales skills by focusing on some of these areas, and you're going to just hit it out the park. Right?
Exactly. So this is how it's going to support you.
And I bet you the individual will be like, sure, why wouldn't I want to do that? Because I'm going to be like exceptional at it. Instead of, you're not really good at communicating, and everyone needs to be able to be a good communicator. And we'll talk about those different skills here soon. We probably are ready to jump in, but let's finish up with Gen Z. This is interesting.
With Gen Zs, they're able to bring in the dialogue. So they address the good, they address the bad, and they're looking for solutions. They're this mix between, and I think it makes sense, between Gen X and Gen Y, because they learned from both. But they want the dialogue, and this is what they want from the leader as well. When it comes to how they think about the leader, it has to be one of them, which means not necessarily from their generation, but somebody who speaks to them and listens to them at the same time. It's not somebody who just preaches and just tells me how to do what to do. And when it comes down to skills and learning, I learn from you, and there might be some things that you can learn from me. And here's what I see with millennials who are managing Gen Zs, that is kind of natural, because
Yeah.
millennials are very good with, they look at their leaders as a coach. A great leader for them is a coach, is a good coach as well, and they themselves strive to become good coaches and coach their team as well.
So they
So
want to
when
listen and have
they
that
want
dialogue.
to listen, exactly. So that brings, I'm going to be super interested to see what happens once more of the Gen Zs come into the workforce, because they're now in the early 20s. So
Yep. So
with
they're
more of
about
them coming in,
21, 22.
yeah, exactly.
So if
Yeah,
you, and so this kind of goes into the type of, when we talk about talent,
yeah,
and so you
yeah,
have internships. They even have internships even at high school level these days. And then you have the internships for college. You have while you're in college, or recent graduates.
yeah.
And so all of this, and we're going to talk about the friction that happens when you have these groups come in, or if you're doing new trainings, and the system really is in support of the baby boomer generation or the Gen X generation, which adds a lot of complexity. And so it's really fighting and causing friction against these different talent generations that we're talking about. Now, are we ready to move on to
Yeah,
the next slide?
let's
Now,
go.
here's a interesting. Let me see if it's gonna play nice. Hold on here. All right. So now this is interesting. I thought it. I've known America Succeeds. I met them at the Business Agility conference a couple years back, and they had an initiative around the art of agile, or agile age of agile, and in working with agile skills and corporations. And so what they have done is a rethink, and they're growing and learning, which it wouldn't surprise me, is that now they are saying our new strategy is really about these durable skills. And Roxana and I, we kind of ran through them and said, this is interesting, because when we talk about soft skills or human element skills, right? I want to we incorporate the heart and the human about everything.
Yeah,
We and the wheel, all of you, if you want, you can always go to their website and download. They have a whole PDF. We can drop that in the link. But the whole point is, when you start to walk the wheel and look at this, I start to go, oh my gosh, me working with agility, this is that agile mindset, that people talk about, like, hey, these are things. And so they're trying to teach, they're wanting to bring this in and change the education system, and really give real life skills that are applicable personally and both professionally. But they've done a lot of studies in this, that organizations, about 7 out of 10 of them, are actually looking for this, and they need this in the job market. So it's not only a nice to have, it's actually a must have. So organizations that are trying to work and be adaptive to our world of uncertainty. Those of you that are familiar with VUCA, right? It's highly volatile, it's unpredictable right now. They're basically saying we need these durable skills out there in order for us to survive in our organizations. We need good problem solving. We need people that are willing to collaborate. We need people that are resilient, that are able to adapt in the world of unknown. Now, this acknowledgement, on one hand, is great, but we're also realizing that if you teach all these things, what does that really look like, right? And there's a lot of complexity to it, based on, I'm going to teach this, but when people try to apply it, it might
exactly.
not be conditions, environment that support it.
Yeah,
Leadership, like you and I were talking about this before we got on air. You can't, leadership skills, or just leadership, is not a one size fits all. If we really want to help folks, when we talk about leadership, is getting them to understand their own unique style of leadership, because there's many different ways to lead, and then there's not just one way, and organizations benefit the different types of styles, and we know that based on research. So what are some couple things that you were noodling on this? I'd love to hear.
so I'm super passionate about skills, and when it comes to these skills, I call them personal skills, because they're either intrapersonal, so it has to do with ourselves or interpersonal, um, which help us deal and manage our relationships with others. But what I see is exactly what you said. There's one thing to teach these skills and another thing to help people master these skills, because actually
Yeah.
learning happens once you've started to master something, and when you master something, that means it has become a habit. And now that's where the environment comes in, because habits cannot be
You
created if the
practice it.
environment is not, exactly, if the environment is not there to allow you to practice that. And this is where I've seen so many, for example, leadership programs, hugely expensive, that people took, they went through that program, and then the behavior didn't change because the skills couldn't be practiced in the same environment as they got back from that program. So this is where I see and there's the disconnect, and exactly what you and I are very passionate about. How do we make sure that we help create that environment as people are in college, for example? How do we prepare them? How do we get them ready to actually put these skills into practice as they enter the workforce? And what are we doing in the workforce where we sometimes hire based on diversity and diverse set of skills, and we keep people based on compliance with what we want as a status quo?
Yeah,
And
it's going to
that
look
is another
differently with every
disconnect.
individual.
Yeah,
There's no way this is a
exactly.
check the box.
Yeah,
Hey, everyone has all these things, because at the end
exactly.
of the day, and we're going to talk about this next, is where people really want to put their energy. I did want to give some props to Manisha, talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
where you said,
I
I
love that.
find Gen Z quite talented, given they have a lot of experience to information, opportunities, and technology than Gen Y, but need grooming around making their skills visible.
Yeah,
That was a very interesting
I
point. And they
agree.
can easily get lost given the amount of information getting consumed day by day.
Yeah.
And that is very true.
Yeah, they
Now,
are like because I have two Gen Zs at home, I can definitely attest to that. And they're pretty pessimistic as well. And saying, how am I gonna, I'm wondering what kind of job I will have, and what, because I'm actually good at this and that, but I don't know if anyone will hire me for that. And that is a huge question for employers. What are you hiring for? And what are you keeping people for?
yeah, and now if any of you might have experienced this, and let us know in the chat that you went and look and you're looking at the job market, and say maybe you're one of those that are trying to go for the thriving versus surviving, and you're going, what else can I do out there? And you start looking at the job descriptions and what might have you, and going, how do I make some of the wonderful things that I know I can do transfer invisible into this job, or I don't even know what kind of job I can do.
Yeah.
Most of if you look at, you look at the job posting boards, you have to actually pick the job and then submit it, right? Or I think the other options you have career fairs probably. But what if, and this is something I noodle and kind of wonder, is what if there's a different way to allow someone to understand maybe the possible jobs that you're looking for in your organization that someone could be a really great fit for. And it's not, they didn't never thought that they could apply for it. And they probably can learn rather quickly. Like I give always the story when I switched from teaching to a software trainer. Now, back then, I basically connected the dots and said, okay, if I'm in education, maybe I should go for a training job out there in the corporate world. So I was like, oh, technology, tech. I kind of was smart about that and said, I should get into tech. I think it's going to grow. It's going to be something. Boy, that was a smart move on my part. And so I got a job training software, and I was able to bridge that gap, but it was a whim. And when I went in that job, she basically, I remember she was like, teach back my, the roll of portfolio thing we used to use with the calendars and stuff. She goes, teach me how to use that. And then she looked at me and she was like, oh, okay, she can think on her feet. She can actually facilitate. She can go there.
Yeah.
And she said, you know what? You're a science major. You're smart enough. I bet you can figure out our accounting software for the travel industry. We'll hire you as a junior trainer. How is that? I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's very interesting where a lot of these skills, and I see is if you have a lot of these durable skills, all the other things can be taught.
Exactly.
These are the hard ones,
Yep.
that are
Yeah.
very hard to teach.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of stories around that. I was sharing before we got on air about how one of my friends, she is not part of the hiring process, but she has to train them. And she was saying that this one individual didn't have any common sense, right? I was sharing that offline, and this kind of goes back to, not to get down in the rabbit hole of that, it was getting back to these lists of
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, right? I had empathy for both parties, but did the system fail the individual that didn't have quote unquote common sense that she was complaining about because it made her job
Yeah.
difficult?
I think
And
processes
then,
fail us, right? When
yeah,
here's a good example of maybe where the hiring process didn't fit the purpose. Like exactly that. Because if the process then gets in the way of us actually doing the work and getting results and performing, then what's the point of the process? I think that's another question that employers can ask more often, right? What's the point of this process? Why do we have it? Why do we keep it? What does it benefit us?
yeah. Now we're going to jump into something a little fun. I have been posting on, some of you may or may not have seen, where I have taken class. Let me see if it goes to the next thing. It's not wanting to play. Hold on. There we go. So I went and I took Connections at Base Camp, and you can look up it to get into detail. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but really the gist of it is really working in complex systems. And so you'll see to the left, when we are thinking about organizations, there's a lot of complexities there, right? A lot of systems, especially when we're working with human systems. And think of human systems with our customers when we do a lot of our user research, the market's changing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then also when we try to scale and create a process in order for us to be a lot more effective and efficient in the way that we work, we start to move over to some other spaces. But if you look to the right with the blue circle that kind of goes around, think about the skills that we just talked
Mhm.
about. Is how are we teaching and helping folks with these skills how to flex into areas of complexity, right? Really complex areas, but then they also can work in different situations where if you have a product, for example, that is already at scale, it's been around for a while. And so you're really working on, say, if you're a developer, working on something that's pretty solid. But you do have to jump over to the complex world when something happens with the users or the market and there's different needs. So now you got to go back and figure out, okay, or something happens within your system. And so when I start to think about these skill sets, and you bring all these new skill sets, say the education system starts to change. Say we have programs that we're teaching new future leaders and what might have you, or you're teaching agile, right? In these organizations, you put them, plop them back into the system that they work, and it's a system that doesn't support working a certain way in those skills. And so, to your point, Roxana, you're not able to apply them.
Yep.
And so, we want people to work with complexity and complex problems and all of these different things. And we're teaching them all these skill sets. But the environment is creating friction and constraint that isn't allowing the ability to always constantly practice this, because they are really wanting the structure. They are wanting things to be known, and not necessarily saying, hey, let's take a world where it's safe to fail,
Yeah.
right? It's fail to safe. And so then you're not able to, if I go back, to some of these skill sets, how are you teaching them resiliency? What are they being resilient about if they're not safe to fail? Right? They're more in a fail to safe environment. So you wonder why those skill sets aren't being developed, or practices, to your point. They
Yeah.
can't ever master them.
No, exactly. There's no way. But it's funny because, and I like how you and I are also on a learning journey separately, but together.
And then we go,
um,
whoop, whoop,
and
whoop.
but it's your program, which in so many ways complements my learning program on team coaching, which talks about teams as a complex adaptive system. And I
Mm-hmm.
think where we need to, and what we need to wrap our heads around, is the fact that there is no way that something is going to be fixed anymore. So once we get the gist of it and got the hang of it, high chances are that it's going to change. So, and that makes it
We
more
never stay
complex.
in one area.
Exactly.
It's the
What
constant.
exactly, and that gives it the complexity, the chaos, and that's where you need to be adaptive as a system. And this is what we do in the team coaching with the teams that we're coaching, is like, how are you adaptive and how are you adapting? How are you able to do that? Because that's going to be essential, and talk about durable skills. And that's
Yeah,
going to
and
be
how do you
something that
work
you
in
need to
each of
work on.
these domains and systems? What you'll start to learn is, and this is a really cool subject that one of them brought up, was
Mhm.
that it's never about managing the people, it's managing the interactions.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so if you think
I love that.
about how you're doing organizational design,
Mhm.
and also in change, if you think
Yeah.
about the leading indicators about what are the behavior and changes that you're trying to do, it's always about the value at the end, which are your lagging indicators. Did it actually do what you needed to do?
Yep.
And so you might have probing and sensing, and you're moving around in these different domains, but is you have to have the ability to be able to understand what system you're in to use the skill set in a certain way, because again, context is king.
For
And so they
sure.
gave an example around like design thinking. If you're design thinking in a very chaotic, right? So imagine during the pandemic was quite chaotic, and everyone was trying to figure out, well, what do we need to do for our users? What is changing? What do we, what are we going to do for remote working? That's, there was a lot of design thinking in that chaotic space. But think about, will that be the same way if you did design thinking, that process, that technique, if you were in a highly complex environment versus a chaotic one? And
Mm-hmm.
so the skill sets that we were talking about before, when we think about in talent, is that ability to understand and work with all of that. Now, I am no expert in this, but I think it fascinates me when we start to really understand, as we develop these skills and the environments that we're putting people in, how it creates friction, because there are natural constraints in there, and what do we do about it? Now, should we jump into our next
Yes,
topic,
because
which is
and
quite
I
interesting?
think it goes perfectly with the comment that we got. I think it is less managing the people, but more understanding the people. And
That goes into our next topic.
it perfectly goes into our next topic, and also it builds on what you just said. It's about the interactions, and it's about creating that environment where people understand how they're interacting with each other, and why they're interacting that way, and what
Yeah.
they all bring into the conversation.
Now,
And that,
I posted this yesterday,
yeah,
and some of you may or may not have seen it.
yeah.
And so I talk a lot about, and so does some of our other folks in the world, when it comes to energy. So me being a science major, I absolutely love science, and really get into anything out there where it starts to get me to rethink and think about some of these things. And so the aspect of energy, and knowing that we can measure impact energy. And so when we think about momentum, mass, um, velocity, right? If you look at the science equation of momentum, so we know that if you have a group of people, that's a mass. And you start to think about kinetic energy and potential energy and all this fancy stuff is how do we actually build momentum? How do we sustain momentum? And when we think about the particular goals and outcomes that we're actually trying to achieve, we can start taking insights into that. Or if we're going into a situation and we know where the momentum and energy will be, say in a workshop, we can start thinking about it. Now, this example starts to show this is actually a collective of people of where their energy goes and where they lean more. And this kind of explains why does the group go there more pronounced. And so in this situation, this group has the energy to create clarity, predict, and make plans. But if we were in context and we were a group that is really about transformational change or innovation and doing something different, they might not have the energy for that. They're going to go into more pragmatic strategy. And they're probably going to do making some great actionable plans. They have some energy for that, but they have they might spend a lot of time making sure they're clear on everything, rationalizing everything, going through all the whys, and their momentum might be a little bit slower of getting to action. Their momentum is going to be really slow and not have steam for anything that's transformational and change with this group. So what do you do with that? What are the conditions that you want to create in order to change this paradigm? Because you're going to get the kind of results that you're going to get. Are you going to achieve the outcomes that you need based on the momentum and energy of this team? So when we talk about understanding people, right, and talent, and we're hiring, would that make us think about what kind of energy we need into this team right now? Do we want more alike? Or do we need to kind of balance this because we already know where they go?
And also, what I want to say is because and again, it's just, I talked about it this morning and we were talking about it in the context of, for example, how do we create an environment of psychological safety in the team where people feel that they can contribute. So going back to understanding people and what they're bringing. Now, in this particular team where we have these percentages, we have clearly nobody who has energy for new revolutionary ideas or solutions, something that hasn't been done before. So where it connects with the skills of how are we being creative so that we're serving our clients in the market and so that we are successful long term, that might be a blind spot. But also looking at this, are we actually making sure that people feel they can easily contribute in the team? Or are we rather acknowledging and praising those people who are the 40% and who predict and make plans and strategies and bring the clarity? Are we more inclined to listen to them and give them a voice rather than the other 20% people that are distributed in hands-on collaboration and improvement energy, who might feel that they're completely out of the conversation sometimes, that they don't have room, that they don't have the space to say what concerns them, what they agree with, what they don't agree with, how they see things, how can we improve this or that. Not to mention, who is there that you go to even ask for how can we differentiate ourselves if this is the kind of stuff that we need to do. So it gives you the context of what people are bringing, and it's not about personality, because you can be an introvert and an extrovert and have energy for one of these things. It's not about that. It's how do we contribute, and do we actually give people a voice equally, or are we more focusing on one thing or another?
We also know, like when we talked about durable skills, that we showed how you apply those skills are going to be very different based on these energies. We know that.
Yeah.
We also know, and we're going to have a couple of different guests and some future topics, those of you that might be interested, hint, hint, that we're going to talk about the shifts in energies with people, right? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to values and belief systems, we all know that we change. We're humans.
Yeah.
And so our energies can change. Now, it doesn't mean that we're trying to change people. I'm going to be very clear about this. It's not about trying to change people. It's about people growing and evolving. But if somebody loves in putting energy, if I see someone that really loves the energy of making plans actionable and getting things done, and that is where they love to be, I would not, and I know you would not. We would never have a desire to change that.
Yeah.
It's more of the conditions and the outcomes that we're actually trying to do is, would it benefit the talent to have a little bit more higher energy about continuous improvement and excellence, because it's important to us.
Yeah.
And so if they're, say, for example, really low on the energy in that area, they probably aren't wanting to go there. But it doesn't mean we're trying to make them that person. It's more of, we just want you to actually care about that and focus on it a little bit more. And we're going to bring in some people that have that are in the talent space and the recruiting. We have some folks from the younger generation that worked in the education that could talk about what they've learned on some of this data and research, and it's quite fascinating. I know myself and you, our energies have shifted based on how we were growing and developing in the conditions and the outcomes and goals that we personally had. So if you bring it back into organizations and talent, if you start to get clarity on the goals and outcomes as a business or a team, department, what might have you, right? Context is king. And then you start to understand what energies that you might need in order to actually optimize a team. If you're hiring for a team, if it's an individual, you can go by what are the tasks that we need to do, and what's the outcome and value of where that person's going to contribute and make an impact. Is, do we want to try to have to force someone to be someone that they're not? Or do we want to find someone that is a little bit more balanced, because we don't have the time to teach that and develop that. Now you hear the I'll leave it with just this one thing, because I know you want to add it. Is I talked to some people, as we hire for people that are trainable and teachable, and we can teach them the skill sets. But here's the thing. It's a lot more uphill battle to teach skill sets when it comes to those durable skills and getting them to increase the energy that doesn't exist.
Yeah, you have to know. I mean, this is where it's helpful, and this is what I see that it's most helpful, especially when it comes to teams, right? Because people start to understand what they are bringing into the team, and I understand what I'm bringing, you understand what I'm bringing, and I understand what you're bringing. So then when we create this common language, we create the language that we can talk to one another, so that we appreciate each other more and we complement each other, where you have more energy for this and I have less energy for this, but I have more for that. And then, because nobody's going to have energy for all of these things, nobody's going to know everything, nobody has all of the skills and the knowledge and the experience and everything, right? So this is what you want. This is a high performing team. You want diversity, you want collaboration, and you want a diverse set of skill sets and a diverse kind of energy that people are bringing. And when they become aware of what each other contributes with, when the leaders of that team become aware of it, and the team together, that's when it gives them a boost of motivation, of trust, of psychological safety, of engagement, all of that. And those are crucial elements if you want them to stay, no matter what happens.
And context is king, to where what you need might not be what you need today, might not be what you need tomorrow.
Exactly.
And so it's all about gathering insights in order to make intelligent decisions and making sense of it. And when we talk about humans, and this whole subject is around talent, there's a lot of complexity around that. And it's something that the more that we can better understand, the better we can actually make sense
Yeah.
and start experimenting, because maybe our solution isn't the right one, right? But are you comfortable? So when we
Mhm.
talk about a lot of there's HR agility in HR, let me say that right, where experimentation, right? We try to teach that, because when you make these policies about your talent attraction, you might need to probe, right? You're living in the land of complexity that I pointed out, in order to see what's going to actually attract the new talent
Mhm.
and the type of talent you have. And it might shift and change, because depending on where you're hiring within the organization, it might not be the same. So you're dealing
Yeah.
with a lot of complexity there. So you might
Yeah.
have multiple different types of probing, right?
Yeah.
And then you might have an area where it's pretty solid, it's pretty stable, and so you can create a system, a process that could be repeatable, right? So then you go into that other space that was to the right of that complicated that I showed
Mhm.
earlier. So I know, Manish, you had a question. I don't want to ignore
Yeah.
it, because
Yeah.
we're not about that. So you
And
asked, do you think Gen Z would prefer remote working compared to working from the office? If the remote working is preferred, and you think that's a challenge, not every company will follow work from home. And you're right.
let me say that. I don't see that preference, to be honest. And here's why. Most of and a lot of Gen Zs have had the experience of learning remotely during the pandemic, and they didn't like it. The majority of them didn't like it. And if you look at how many actually stayed remote after the pandemic, there's just a few of them. The majority went back to in-person learning because they prefer it. I think they have a huge sense of community and social learning that happens, because again, they learn from everywhere, and that will translate into the way that they work. One thing that will happen with Gen Zs, though, is I think companies need to be prepared to have people who might be working for different organizations, or people who work for them and work for themselves as well, or project based, rather than the classical full time employee model that we're used to.
Oh, it's
I
there's
think this
a
is the
those of you
change.
that are might not even know, but there's brain trust. I just found out about this, where you can actually go in, and it's more of the hands-on skills, like a
Mhm.
developer, like a product manager, or they do have some project manager. But my point
Yeah.
is, you can actually go into this brain trust, do your profile, and they will help you find positions, and you have a choice of like full-time, part-time, temporary.
Mm.
And so the models of even the types of jobs that you have are different. I'm an independent. I've been an independent for about 7 years. I haven't been an employee. Now, I say that I have my business, but really I'm an independent freelancer, because most of the work that I have gotten is through working on projects for large consulting companies that need additional work,
Yeah.
extra help. But I run it through my business, because that's the way I'm structured as a freelancer. It's just smart,
Mhm.
good business for me to do that, right? If any of you ever want to learn about that, contact me. We'll talk about that. A lot of people make a lot of mistakes when they become freelancers. Um, but when it comes to working from home, I agree with you, Roxana. It's highly contextual,
Yeah.
because if you're somebody that needs the flexibility to be home because you have some
Yeah.
personal reasons, you're not going to agree with that statement. Or if you're someone that has a 2 hour commute, you're not going to agree with that.
Yeah.
If you're
You need the
somebody that's
flexibility.
paying, there was a post on
Yeah.
LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and I think it was in San Francisco area, and let me know, folks, that the gas was $7, and then somebody replied, "Well, UK is even worse than that, right?" That they're not going to want to pay the gas to commute, so they don't
Mhm.
want to go into the office.
Mhm.
So everyone looks at this very differently,
Yeah.
and context is king. And so there's a lot of complexity to answer this. And I think the one common thing that I think everyone is agreeing, it's not about the actual remote versus virtual or
Mhm.
what most people, the common theme is flexibility
Yeah.
and the ability to choose.
Yeah. Yeah. Have a model that I can choose from. Don't have just one model, right?
Now here's another one we want. Oh, and
I
hi,
love it.
Angelina. Wanted to make
Yeah,
sure reach out.
hey,
You said
shout out to
hello.
you. Thanks for being
Um,
with us again.
so I know that this is going a little bit longer, but we're kind of
Yeah.
enjoying this
Like,
conversation.
yeah,
So we're going to do a full hour. We're about to close up shop here.
yeah.
So I wanted to add this. One of our LinkedIn participants today. Yes, it's about being proactive with people, their needs, wants, and energies, and are opposed to treating them as commodities. Whew. Sticking them in buckets and guessing about how the team will achieve, largely reactive and well too late.
Yeah, exactly. I love that treating them as a commodity. I think, yeah, this is what we've seen.
And it's
So,
never about the buckets, right?
yeah,
It's always about understanding, and then in context, making better decisions of what's
yeah,
actually happening in the
yeah,
current moment, so you can create the right interactions in dealing with those particular constraints. And then also thinking about, well, where do you want to go and how do you adapt to that, right?
yeah,
So because situations are constantly changing, I love all the techniques and out there, and especially when it comes to science, I'm always learning. I just shared something I've already known about Knuthen, but I really didn't have like a lot of so I signed up and took the class. That's a learner for me, right?
yeah,
I didn't want to do the self-paced. I actually enjoyed. I didn't want to just read a book and try to apply. I really wanted to understand and ask questions, and I learned a lot. And here's one of the tidbits. We talk about divergent thinking. We talk about diversity. But when it comes to psychological safety, one of the things, and this is what I love about the GC index and the energies, is that groupthink is actually a great idea when it comes to designing. When you're doing a particular activity, is to put you with people that are alike
yeah,
more at first, so that you are feeling more comfortable to share your ideas. Especially, can you imagine if you're somebody that's all about different and different ideas, and they stick you with people that that's probably not what they want to talk about.
get
They're all about
frustrated.
getting to action and making like actionable
Yeah,
plans. You'll drive
yeah,
them crazy, because you're wanting to think about all these concepts, and they're just like, oh my god, can we actually make something?
hmm,
Yeah, and they get very frustrated, and so they're not going to really want to hear, because they're just like,
yeah,
well, I don't understand, how do you actually do that, like how do you implement
yeah.
it? And so it's very interesting, because that was a learning moment for me. And Manisha, thank you for joining. I'm glad you found
For sure.
value. Please come back. We're gonna have another session as we're closing shop here. We're
But
trying to get a
for
special guest, but we haven't
and
really finalized it.
I just wanted to say, for those of you who've been with us live, and maybe those of you who are going to watch the replay, if you want to continue the conversation around what you can do with the game changing index, Veronica and I are both happy to talk to you. You can reach us actually at gamechangingwork@gmail.com, or just message us on our profiles wherever you can catch us, or put it in a comment, and we can take
Yeah,
it
drop
from
it in
there,
the
because
comments
we're
and say,
happy to
hey,
continue the
I'm
conversation and give
interested.
you a better idea about it, so that you get the full grasp of what it can do for
And we'll
understanding
continue
people.
to talk about it
Yeah,
more,
exactly.
because it's
Yeah,
it's a new thing.
yeah,
And we're realizing we need to kind of share this information. Now, it's not the only thing that we do, but it's complementary to everything we do. So we
but
talked
it's a
about what the
very
skills, the
useful, yeah,
coaching,
it's a
because
very useful tool.
at the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're all about it's if you're forcing, right? You know
Mhm.
what happens in the science of when you create an impulse. An impulse can work against or work for when it comes to momentum. And so, why not create an impulse that actually works with the momentum and that you
Right.
continue the speed, versus creating an impulse that slows momentum down?
I
And so, this
love
is
it. Oh my
about
God.
do the science teacher
So
come out?
good. Wow. Thank you so much for this,
So,
Veronica. This is just awesome.
So we're going to talk about that more. And that's why I like
Yeah.
about it, because it's all about the energy of moving forward in a positive way, creating momentum. And so this is why we always bring it in our conversations, because if we're trying to create a learning culture, if we're trying to actually create a positive workspace, isn't that positive? isn't that like good momentum moving forward for everyone? So
Yeah.
anything that helps with positive momentum of moving forward, we're always going to bring it into the show.
Yeah.
So our next show, we're probably going to have another one this month. We are working on it, and we're going to continue talking about the different energies and the talent. We're going to talk about the generation, and we're going to talk about a lot of the talent word, and bringing some other folks that are working in this space that we think is interesting, bring them along, and we'll dive into the subject. So stay tuned for this month, and we'll post it soon. But you can always go to our Game Changing Work YouTube channel, subscribe, be a part of that channel. We have probably going on almost 2 years worth of episodes that Roxana and I have done, and we're constantly evolving and changing our show. But it's always and has been centered around people.
And you
Something
can check
about
us out
people.
also at gamechangingwork.com. You'll find out more information about what we're all about.
I don't even think I have a caption for that.
You do not.
I don't think so.
Gamechangingwork.com. That's easy. I mean, I'll put the link in the comments as well.
All right.
But thanks for being with us,
time
folks. We
to
hope
sign
this
out.
was helpful. Yeah.
Oh, do you see that? My virtual, my
Yeah,
hand
it's
got removed. It's like,
"Whoa."
where did my hand go? All right. See you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for being with us.